Hi, everyone. Welcome to Psalm Sense. I'm your host, Rachel K. Ng, and we are here to talk all things olfactive, especially perfume. And we have our wonderful, amazing special guest here, Jura Rose, here to share, here from Ireland, to share all of his wisdom and amazing thoughts and opinions. So, hi, Jura. How are you today?
Hi, Rachel. I'm good. I'm very good. I'm happy to be talking. Like, even though I've been spent the whole day talking about fragrance in my shop, I'm happy to still talk about fragrance. So it's like my favorite thing. So I'm good. Life can't be better when you love doing what you do. So
Oh, absolutely. That's so true. And definitely when it comes to an art, a passion, a love like fragrance, like for us frag heads, I know we can just talk endlessly. So it's so wonderful to be part of this community where you have like-minded people who don't mind listening and chatting back.
yes, like when you talk to people, they're like, okay, that's enough now. Okay, you spoke about that for a bit too long. Okay, but us, no, just carry on. And when do we stop?
Yeah, exactly. So I have a son, I have a 5-year-old, and he's turning out to be kind of in America, we say a gearhead. He's like all into cars and he will talk endlessly about cars. And for me, after about 20 minutes, I'm done. But perfume, I can talk endlessly.
I can understand the
Speaking of
pain.
perfume, speaking of perfume, may I ask, what are you wearing today?
I am wearing Amouage Lyric, which is for me, it's one of my favorite amouages. And I wouldn't say I'm like one of these people who really love amouage and collect them, but it's one that when I wear, fragrances you just connect with and you just enjoy wearing, and you don't even have to overthink it too much. It just fits you. It's one of those for me. Um, and I was actually thinking about there's a sweetness in that fragrance I find very interesting. It's not honeyed for me. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've tried them sort of drinks that are like they're not carbonated, but they're in a can, but you'd think they'd be carbonated. They're usually found in like Asia markets, and it's like chrysanthemums sort of flavored sugar cane. It's got that type of sweetness to it for me. So it's not like the finish isn't too sugary. It's got that sort of bitter edge to it as well. And I get that type of sweetness in this fragrance when I wear it. And
Oh,
I just
that's so
I
cool.
find it, yeah, it's a delicious perfume.
I have a wonderful sample of Lyric Man, and now, thanks to a friend, our friend Dusan in the in the community who sent it to me, and now hearing you say that, I'm gonna have to wear that maybe tonight or even tomorrow. I'm gonna have to go back and think of that because I don't think of that fragrance as very sweet, but I mean you're right. Amouage fragrances have so many layers, and they definitely have something. They definitely have a richness to a sweetness, depending on the fragrance, right? To them, absolutely, especially in towards the heart and the dry down. That it's so and they're just so complex and lush and lovely, and yeah,
Mm,
that's so cool.
yeah. So that was my scent of the day. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. For me, I'm actually kind of doing some testing. There's this really cool brand here in the United States called Kelly and Jones. And these are fragrances, and I have some individual fragrances, and I also have I have some little samples. And this is a really interesting independent brand, and these are fragrances that are made to pair with different beverages. So basically, the founder who lives in California, went to a wine cellar, went to a wine testing, and the sommelier who's doing it got so angry and said, "Who is wearing perfume in my wine cellar? No, that is terrible. You never do that. It gets in the way of the aroma of the wine experience." But she actually liked it. She said, "Wait a minute, my perfume is pairing with this wine in these beautiful ways, and I really like that interaction." So she does a series of fragrances, some with wine, others with like mezcal, right? Like there's a series where she has with like this is mezcal roja and mezcal negro, which is like a Mexican liqueurs, mezcal verde that are meant to be fragrances that the notes of the fragrance pair with the notes of the liquors and the drinks. So they're inspired by the liqueurs, they're inspired by the wines, and then they actually are meant to have like a fragrant interaction as you're consuming the beverage, which is like the coolest idea.
Interesting. Is it like a contrast thing, or is it trying to bring out certain things in the
So
fragrance?
that is what I'm trying to figure out actually as I'm doing the samples. And so far, I feel like it's more of a congruence, like it's bringing out like they seem to be matching and really bringing out certain aspects. Like for example, that she has a fragrance called Chardonnay that to me feels like it's echoing and bringing out certain aspects of especially New World California kind of oaky
Mm.
Chardonnay that it's, the aspect of malolactic fermentation that Chardonnay, that all wines pretty much go through, but in Chardonnay you can kind of start it and you could do processing so that it really brings out a buttery kind of richness to the wine. And I feel like she's really creating this fragrance to bring out the vanilla of the oak, the kind of buttery lactic effects, that fragrance can have to really amp those aspects of the wine. Because, you can drink Chardonnay that's super tart and very citric and very like a Chablis, or you can do that like kind of big, mellow, round, oaky, buttery Chardonnay like in California, and anything in between. So yeah, I feel like it's a great question. But so far, I haven't tried everything, but so far I'm seeing a lot of similarities that really do pull out and amplify notes rather than contrasts.
Okay, yeah. That I'd say you'd have to have a bucket and spit out into a bucket sampling those perfumes. Otherwise, you'd be waddling home, absolutely paralytic.
Yeah.
What have you been doing trying perfume?
Yeah, right. And it's really interesting because apparently this kind of matching fragrance with wine and matching fragrance with like a fine dining experience has actually become like apparently in like, the kind of posh, more fancy, stylish areas like in New York City and like, where people are very fashionable. It's become like yeah. Like if you go to a fancy event, if you go to like I don't know, a Fendi event or a Prada event, then they might sit you down for like a fragrance and wine pairing. That's like become a thing now. And I wonder, because this brand has been around since like 2016, I wonder if people are getting the ideas from her, or I mean, I don't know, who knows like where it comes from, but it's really interesting.
I know like the whole world of perfume is very connected even to art exhibitions and stuff. And I think I actually I was talking about We Are Sentient. I know he's done stuff because he deals with art gallery, modern art gallery in Dublin. So yeah, I don't know if it sort of evolved from that, or maybe she did come up with the idea or something. Who knows?
Yeah. Oh, it's so fascinating. And that's something that I love about fragrance, is that it combines so many different worlds in such beautiful ways. Like, it combines science and art, right? It combines, because you really do have to learn about farming and materials and agriculture, as well as contemporary chemistry practices. I mean, it just combines so many worlds. And definitely when you think of packaging, you think of almost sculpture when it comes to the bottles. If there's so many things that you can look at from different angles, and it's so fast. It's beautiful. Like we picked the best pastime.
Yeah, and it's like anything you get into heroes. There's a lot more in that world than meets the eye, and there's a lot more detail and thought and a lot more knowledge behind it than you'd ever realize.
Oh my God. Yes. And I'm so thankful for you for being here today, because I know, Jura, that you work in I think you were telling me earlier, the only niche fragrance shop in Ireland. So you spend your whole day smelling, analyzing, learning about fragrances, which is, most people like me, like I have a job, I'm cleaning my house, taking care of my family all day, going to work, I fit in fragrance when I can, but you're someone who's found the job within the passion that you love, and that's amazing. So you're here to share some knowledge with us. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm so grateful. So thank you. If you don't mind, I thought I would ask, because here I live in the Midwest of the United States. And right now we're kind of in the middle of like the doldrums of summer, where it's August, the heat is intense, the humidity is intense. It is just so hot. It's kind of the slog when you're sick of the heat at the end of the summer, and there's no crisp, cool days. There's no crisp, cool mornings really yet. There will be in about a month, but so far it's hard to get through. So I've been thinking about, well, where does the aspect of freshness, where does fresh come in fragrances? So I've been thinking about, things like dihydromercenol in fragrances, things like citrus in fragrance, things like aromatics in fragrance. What florals and fruits can be considered crisp or fresh? Where does fresh come traditionally versus in a contemporary, more aroma chemical facet? So I don't know if you have any thoughts on this idea of freshness in perfumery, and might want to share some with us what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, freshness is an interesting one, because I'll start with like a small anecdote I've had experience with. Um, you know, L'air du Desert Moroccan.
Yes.
Would you class that as a fresh scent?
No, not off the top of my head, but I haven't worn it in a couple years. So
I wouldn't. But the interesting thing is, I've shown it to so many people, and a lot of them go, "Oh, that's fresh."
really
Oh,
interesting.
that's fresh. And a lot of people, and I think that brings into the idea is, okay, what is this perception of fresh that we think now? I think it's one of those things. If the more you get into perfume, you see as you start looking at, okay, you have all these genres of perfumes. You have chypres and fougères and your eau de cologne. People think, oh, the cologne are the freshies. Anything to do with sea salt and beaches and citruses, that's the fresh. Then if you even get like anything spicy, that's not fresh.
Hmm.
But then actually, when you actually come with it, say if you're completely new to perfume, but you smell L'air de Desert Moroccan, there's a lot of like clove and cumin and coriander and spices, and those spices can actually do have a freshness to them. They're very aromatic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, eugenol, if you smell eugenol, pure eugenol, which is in clove, yes, it does have a spiciness. It has a very fresh metallic aspect to it as well. So a lot of these materials do have a freshness to them. And in many ways, a lot of perfume materials, there's a fresh aspect to them. What we would perceive as like something that hits you, it's very effervescent, very light, very uplifting. I'd even argue that labdanum, which is quite a thick resinous material, has a slight freshness because it's from a plant. It's cistus. It has a herbal quality to it. And if you put labdanum into, say, a fougere, it does add a bit to the sort of lavendery, fresh opening of a fragrance. But if we was to strictly think about fresh fragrances, yes, citruses come into it. The bergamots, lemons, your mandarin. You have different styles of. You have green mandarin, yellow mandarin, red mandarin. You have yuzu, which is it's becoming more popular. Um, I think we associate that with being fresh is because a lot of I think it comes back to our experiences in the real world with like summer, like, a glass of lemonade in the summer, that's very refreshing.
Yeah.
It's sort of, why does that make it feel fresh? But it just seems to cut through the heat. So when you smell something very zesty and citrusy, you just think that's refreshing,
Yeah.
you know? To be honest, smell is a very confusing thing because it's like sweet in perfume. When you smell something, it can't technically be sweet, because sweet is a taste. You have to use your tongue for that. You're not trying. I mean, if you tried the perfume, it'd be extremely bitter.
Right.
But our brains can sort of trick us to think, oh, that smells sweet through association. And I think freshness might fit into that. So I think when someone smells L'air du Desert Moroccan, there's something in that, in the sort of spicy opening that people think, oh, fresh. Whereas, if we get into it, we've categorized all these perfumes. You think that can't be fresh because it's a spicy amber, and
Right.
it's eau de cologne can't be.
Yeah.
So fresh can be. I could say it's whatever you make of it. Like if you just blind smell something and it smells fresh to you, and it kind of is fresh. Your nose doesn't lie. I don't know what you think about this.
No, I think it's fascinating. I'm having all these thoughts while you're talking, because talking about eugenol, for example, and spiciness. And I do think there's something about clove and eugenol that reminds me of like the spiciness of black pepper, which and like you're saying, other spices, which again reminds me of kind of the sinus clearing aspects of something like clary sage, right? Which makes me think of this
Yeah.
which makes me think of terpenic, of the terpenic aspects of different fragrances. Like, how woods, for me, woods smell very fresh and it's kind of that terpenic thing. And I think even citrus peel has some terpenes in it, but I could be mistaken. So,
Yeah.
so all the things that you're saying make me think, to add to, we're talking about marines and citric and other things. What you were saying also brought to mind like terpenic sense, and then also I wrote down aldehydic sense. Too, because I do think there's something about aldehydes that are very like opening and refreshing. And because you're right. I mean, fresh is such, now that we're talking about it, I realize it's such an amorphous term that it's kind of like, well, it when you feel it, but you can experience it in so many different ways. Like you're saying green, like the green freshness of, of if you walk into a forest, you can feel like the fresh oxygen that's coming from the leaves of the tree, and that's so fresh. And it's just, for me, it's usually something that lifts me up and kind of opens my sinuses and is maybe a little bracing when I think of freshness. So I feel like just like you said, eugenol, clove totally does that. Citrus totally does that. Marine fragrance, and we talk about marine in a contemporary sense. Sometimes we're talking about dihydromercenol, which for me is super aggressive. Like for me, that's and I think it's because it's less found in female fragrances. That's something that is extremely intense and aggressively fresh, almost in a way that I don't like. Because I think that like it's almost industrial fresh.
Yeah, no, I agree. Aldehydes is an interesting one we can go into as well. And I think when you said something that lifts you, maybe freshness is something that has a lightness to it. So maybe when you go into a forest or a beach, it's not the actual the object itself, it's the space in between them. Not that closeness.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like some perfumes can be very dense.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel fresh, it's very closed. But if you just opened that up, it could have a freshness to it.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering whether that's what you mean by freshness. Aldehydes definitely add freshness for me, and like a soapiness. Because for me, they've got what I look for when I want something in very hot weather, I look for something more bitter. I find any sweetness, even like some natural raw materials have a sweetness, like geranium oil can have a bit of a sweetness to it. And for me, when I'm in like very hot weather, I want dry, bitter fragrances. Like you're sweating, I just want something to sort of just take away that humidity, just suck it away. Aldehydes do that. They're very bitter ingredients, and they do occur naturally. So I have to get this right. So I think C10 and C12, for example, are found naturally in citrus oils, and C8. So this is the lengthy carbon chains. C11, which is a very important one, the waxy one, is found in things like rose oil, for example. So they do occur naturally in naturals as well, but we've isolated them. It's perfumery is a lot of exaggeration. There's things in nature where we're going to use excess amounts of it. That's kind of what makes a perfume in modern French sense. There's I think Ernest Beau, when he made Chanel No. 5, which I think is probably one of the most revolutionary perfumes, in the sense that there was not many perfumes before that people would either love or hate as much. It was the first Marmite, we call Marmite fragrances, you either love or hate it. It was the first one that people said, like, okay, I hate that, or I absolutely love it. It was one of those first ones that really sort of put itself out there. But that overdose of aldehydes really was that sort of burst of freshness. He wanted something busy. And it wasn't by accident. I know there's stories that it was all by accident, and I know it took a long time to create that scent. And he used aldehyde C10, C12, and C11 for those. And they occur naturally in citrus and things like rose. So rose would have even a freshness. If you smell a rose oil, there is a freshness to it.
Yeah.
If you smell rose, and if you smell any flower, there is a freshness to these flowers. Some of them contain linalool, which is also found in lavender, which is a very fresh smelling material. The only way I can best describe, Sichuan peppercorn. I gave my partner to smell some pure linalool diluted at 10%, and it's like Sichuan peppercorn oil, because it also contains a lot. It's that sort of very metallic, fresh, almost numbing metallic freshness, floral freshness of Sichuan peppercorn. So yeah, even all these spices, florals, freshness, I think it permeates all these ingredients. I think we actually, in a way, it's probably I find it harder to lose freshness when composing fragrance, because even if ingredients have the dense heaviness, they have a freshness, and trying to get rid of that to hide it, it's hard.
Interesting. That's super interesting. Yeah, and I mean, again, I know very little about fragrance making. I've just kind of started to smell raw materials, and it's really fascinating the way. Oh my, it's just, and there's endless knowledge. I imagine, like, once you get started, it's endlessly just, even I've heard that like Jean-Claude Elena, for example, I don't know if it's true, just something I've heard, that he only works with a couple hundred materials, because the combinations and the various dilutions of the various combinations, I mean, it's just endless how they can affect each other. When you have similar smells, when you have contrasting smells, and the different secondary and tertiary impressions they can create that don't actually exist within any of the original materials. I mean, it's just endless.
Like, if you can imagine, like, he works with, like, I think 200 or 300 materials, but even that's enough. Like, if you had, say, a very simple perfume form of 20 ingredients, and if you suddenly decide, okay, I'm going to make 20 variations of this fragrance using the same ingredients, but you decide to overdose each individual ingredient in each one, you get a different smelling perfume. Because overdosing one material really does affect everything else. And I think that's a little bit of the genius of Jean-Claude Elena, because when you get more into materials, you'll kind of smell what he's doing in his perfumes. They are simple, but he knows how to overdose one material in the fragrance, and that will affect the whole thing. And for me, he is kind of genius from doing it in a very simple point, because you can put loads of stuff in there and make a masterpiece, but to do it in very few materials and know what to overdose to get a certain effect I think it's a little bit harder than it sounds.
Yeah. Oh, simplicity is the hardest thing, because it's elegance, and simplicity is the hardest thing. Absolutely. Because it's all about balance and judgment. And wow, you've got to know a lot to be able to do something simply. For sure. And I'm wondering, you're talking about overdosing, which is something that I'm actually trying to kind of figure out now myself. So when I think of overdosing a fragrance, I think of a couple of things. I think of functional fragrance, which in my experience feels like it has a lot of overdosing and like kind of elements that are heroed out. I also think of someone like Germain Cellier, right, who is known for overdosing certain materials. And I wonder, is like you mentioned Chanel No. 5 being such a stunning and such a perfume that an innovative perfume that really moved the field. Do you know when overdosing, like the practice of overdosing in the way that you're talking about, when did it start? Is that a modern perfumery technique, or has that always been a part of perfumery, and that going back to the very beginnings of perfumery, you might just have a sola note, and so technically like a citrus fragrance is technically a citrus overdose, or is a sola note different from a fragrance where one material is overdosed? Does that make sense, like in a structural way?
Really good question. I don't know if I have a solid answer for that. I would be inclined to think that its goalposts have always been moving. So, Jermaine Cellier, when you talk about, say, Bandy, which is an overdose of IBQ, isobutyquinolate, nowadays it might not be, compared to things like Interlude Band and stuff, which has a lot more IBQ in it, for example. I think at the time, the convention, because a lot of these perfumers, especially back then, there was only a couple of labs in France, Paris, New York, and Grasse, and they all knew each other. As Luca Turin says, they all had dealings with each other. They all screwed each other over, and it was a very small community. And I think there was we've got this scary, strong raw material like isobutyquinolate, which is, when you smell it raw, it's rough and it's hairy chested and it's there and it's ready for a fight. They probably use little tiny amounts. Let's not go too much. We just help round off the oak moss and the patchouli in the base. It was someone like Jermaine Cellier goes, I'm just going to take it a little bit further, that you notice it. Like, they didn't want to notice. Like, I find that with even some raw materials I have, some synthetics specifically, if I notice it too much in a perfume, I'm like, ooh, I have to bring that down. It's like this kind of fear, like you don't want that poking out too much. But that type of overdosing thing, that she had the sort of bravery to say, no, I'm going to let it be a bit noticeable. I think, before that, could there have been a perfume who did the same thing? Yeah, I think it was the overdose thing is usually more a synthetic thing, even though like there are fragrances that boast about overdose of rose. But I think like rose overdoses have been done so many times because it's a rose, like a really harsh synthetic, like ethyl maltol angel. We know that one is an overdose of ethyl maltol. And it's usually those synthetics when you just push them. And people think overdose means, oh, it's just going to take up like 60% of the formula. It's not, it's relative.
Yeah.
It might go from 0.1% to 0.17%, but that's an overdose.
Right.
You know,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah, no, and for example, the chemical that I just smelled for the first time, a dihydromercenol, I smelled it for the first time last week, and I was like, whoa, it really took me aback. Like, because when I think of dihydromercenol and all that talk, but I think of Azzaro, I think of CK1, I think of, lots and lots of classic fragrances that have it in it. And then I smelled the actual raw material, and I was like, not what I expected at all. And like you're saying, that the actual raw material can smell so different than the fragrances it's used in. And like you're saying, it doesn't take a lot to overdose. It smelled so industrial, like it smelled like industrial floor cleaner to me, and I was just like, oh my goodness. But then, and like you were saying, in a small enough dosage, or when it's diluted enough, it can have just the most beautiful, amazing effect, just like any other material, right? It's all about how you use it. And so I think of, like, when you think of overdosing, I think about like Gaiac wood right now, and how just everyone is like going Gaiac wood crazy when it was used in small doses for such a long time, right? Just like dihydromercenol was used to like boost lavender for a long time, and it wasn't really noticeable,
Yeah.
Like it was structurally, and it's fascinating, right? And I wonder, okay, here's my question for you. And this question will betray my own fears, maybe, or my own kind of suspicions. But okay, do you think that the industry at large is set up so that the incentives for perfumers mean that perfumers are always, it's like starting like since the big conglomerates kind of all started to really monopolize and take over everything, is that perfumers from now on are always going to want to use, when they decide to overdose something, or hear out a note, or do anything interesting or new, it's always going to be an aroma chemical, like pretty much from now on out. Do you think the incentives are set up that way? Is that, these big oil houses, it's easier and safer for them to make aroma chemicals than it is for them to source raw materials, because sourcing raw materials is just so full of risk. I mean, with climate change, with politics, with treating people ethically. I mean, it's a lot, right? A lot of moving pieces. So, like, isn't it just easier for oil houses to just create things in-house synthetically, and it's has better profit margin, and it's less risk? So does that mean that, like, going forward, we're just going to see a bunch of like synthetic, like, and also I wonder, like, when perfumers work, I mean, they're working with their palette, and they're going to get, if all the new and interesting notes are all aroma chemicals, and you love perfume and you want to work with all the new, interesting, innovative stuff, like, naturally you want to work with whatever's new and interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like, are perfumers like developing a palette that's way up here that normal people can't connect with because we're not around those things? Do you know what I mean? Like, is it becoming like two separate worlds?
Yeah, I think that there's going to be. I mean, I feel like the poop hasn't hit the fan, so to speak. I'm saying that politely when it comes to EU, because I know there's a lot of big stuff about them, and they're prohibiting or possibly banning things with linalool in it, for example, which will affect, a lot of fragrances. It will, talk about freshness. Fresh, almost dead in fragrances if we get rid of linalool.
It's in everything. It's in everything that grows. So
yeah, it's forget about it. I think after like trying to create 100% synthetic perfume is actually extremely hard.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
I mean, like Baccarat Rouge is an example. I'm pretty 100% sure that it's 100% synthetic. One, I don't like it. Most people I know Maria, who I work with, she's a perfumer. She was complaining that she was in a restaurant and she actually just got put off her food because someone was wearing it so strong, and she's just like, I can't eat, it's like a headache. I think there will be synthetic fragrances, but it won't saturate the market completely because it's very hard to make 100% synthetic fragrances. You kind of do need some naturals in there, whether even if it's just a patchouli, a labdanum, a bit of lavender, because it just fills out. I mean, people's noses aren't stupid. It will just smell. Oh, this smells like a chemical mess. You do need some naturals in there, and that's why even the big companies are still pretty scared of the whole EU thing because it will affect them. synthetics can be expensive, you know, to produce. Like sometimes it's worth just, I mean, like iris, irones are very expensive to produce. That's why I say to anyone, if you've got a favorite iris perfume and you're like, oh, I love it, it's the best iris, I said appreciate it. It doesn't matter if it's got real iris butter in there. Trust me, making a good iris accord is not cheap, and it takes skill. You know, appreciate it. Like this carrot seed oil is not cheap. Irons aren't cheap to produce. In some cases, it's actually cheaper to use the real orris butter, even if it's a cheap form. You
Wow.
know, but, you know, it's not always the case that you know the natural is going to be more expensive. Some musks are very expensive. I recently bought some muscadine, which is a very expensive musk. My favorite musk. To me, it's more of like, can't describe. You know, when you cuddle up to someone, you can just smell their warm skin
Yeah,
feeling. It doesn't feel industrial. It feels almost human.
that's awesome.
So yeah, I think there's definitely, I think Baccarat Rouge, funny enough, is sort of pushed a lot of synthetic perfumes because that fragrance is a synthetic perfume. You can make a blockbuster selling synthetic perfume. People copy it. You know, that's a great one. They're like, wow. You could make it for cheaper than Francis Kurkdjian did. I think there will be a split. I think there definitely will be a if the companies go that way. I think niche and indie perfume, especially indie perfumers, will grow more because a lot of niche houses almost operate and behave a bit more like the big companies. They use the big companies for their perfumers. Like you know, you think of a niche company, it's probably like a Julian Raskinait behind that perfume, or so you know IFF's behind it. They're using a lot. They're getting the materials from them and stuff like that. So indie perfumers will definitely grow because there will be people still growing
Yeah.
vanilla and they'll be growing patchouli and rose. It will still be going on. It won't stop. But I think it will find another market. So it might go for a revolution. Who knows? I don't think it's a scary point for fragrance. I think whatever's going to happen, it's going to push forward and it's going to be interesting. But we'll still have perfume. I'm
That
optimistic.
Thank you. I love to hear that optimism. That gives me hope because there's a lot of, voices around. And again, I'm an outsider. I'm not in the industry at all, but it's great to hear that optimism. Actually, that makes me really happy. Thank you. And I think I wrote down a couple things. That niche, you're right. Like, I feel like the idea of niche has changed a lot. It used to just mean some kind of independent business entity outside of the corporate world, outside of that kind of thing that was doing something experimental and interesting. But I feel like almost it's been redefined in a way where, like you were saying, someone who's artisanal and really independent might make their own materials, or they might source materials in a way that's in some way alternative to the big oil houses, although they might sometimes go through the big oil houses, but at least the perfumer, or in some way they're doing something along the supply chain that is interesting and unique. And again, looking for quality in some way that is perhaps different than the standardized commercial, industrial standards, corporate standards that are commercial fragrances. And then I feel like niche is like they're still using IFF, they're still using Givaudan, they're still, do you know what I mean? Mostly, I feel like,
Yeah.
although they might be chasing after fragrance profiles and ideas that are a little bit more interesting or brave or kind of outside the Dillard's, perfume counter, right? Big
Yeah.
box store perfume counter safety zone, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, can we call Frederick Malle niche anymore?
Right. That's a great question.
I
Yeah.
mean, if anyone who's watching this, would you call Frederick Malle niche anymore? Is it? You know,
Yeah.
it's the weird one. I think it's good. I mean, like you're trying an independent. I do have in the sense that I don't think there's too much perfume lovers, and I even see people come in the shops, even if they are fed up with what's going on, and there's even your standard perfume lovers kind of getting to a point. I think COVID brought a lot of people to perfume.
Mm.
Gone through the stages, like you go onto like YouTube or you read a blog or Instagram and you see Jeremy and you try Aventus, and this is for a man, for example. We're talking about a man, and he might buy Office for one, but then he goes in and you find, another YouTuber gets in like a top 10 design, and then he'll go into Roger Parfums, and then he'll go in, and then he'll sort of work and then they get to a point they're like, I've done all that. I think I've wasted a little bit of money. And I think they're seeing through the crap as well. But I still think these people, when I see them, they still love perfume, but they're searching for something. And I
Yeah.
do think there's going to be a lot of indie brands that will, people, even though if they're struggling now, in the next 10 years, they're going to think, wow, a lot of people are flocking to us. I see it like, Hiram Green.
Yeah.
People are starting to love his stuff.
That's great.
And
Yeah.
I know, like he even said, like, it wasn't always easy starting a business like that earlier on. But people are saying, okay, they actually know he's doing something interesting and they're flocking to his fragrances. And I can see brands like that doing very well in the future. And it's kind of nice that they're not operating in those structures that have, sort of developed.
Yeah. And to see people who genuinely, I mean, of course, running a business, you need to stay in business. So that's definitely a motive. But I feel like versus the more, people like L'Oreal fragrances and LVMH fragrances where, profit seems to be almost the only motive, right? We're like down to like the 1/100th of a slice of a penny people are pinching, right? At least when you have independent houses, independent perfumers, they can make judgments, make ethical decisions, even make sacrifices sometimes to say, wait a minute, I want to make something interesting, unusual, beautiful, quality, whatever. And I think the consumer can feel that difference. It's like, oh, I'm going to spend that extra 1/100th of a penny, and I want to make sure that this aspect smells really good and really natural, or really, or really synthetic and really new and interesting and weird, or whatever they're going for, right? Whereas I feel like a lot of times that, where we're getting with a lot of the big brands is just, crowd pleasing, safety, just, I mean, same old. But
and they're definitely worrying about budgets. And like I feel sorry for the a lot of the perfumers that have to reformulate these things. It's not their fault. They're doing their job.
yes,
If you say no, you get fired. So don't hate the perfumers. They're just doing their job a lot of the time. Literally, there's a big pressure. Like, I won't talk of any specific brand, but when a brand gets sold to a big conglomerate, they're going to look at the books. And I know for one brand that their books were not good. They're at losses, and they've obviously come and said, we can't sell that formula in that bottle for that price. We're going to have to cheapen the formula as much as we can and put up the price and get back so much money. They have a margin. They get a new company in, it has to fit that margin, and they're going to squeeze it as much as they can.
Yeah.
And I've seen firsthand the corners cut, if that makes sense.
Yes. I think we've all experienced it. We might not know that we've experienced it, but I think we've all experienced it. I know I for sure have seen, oh, wait a minute, this new bottle, this is very different. And I maybe don't like that difference. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. No, I agree.
And I
just be optimistic. I say be optimistic for perfume.
Yes.
Even if the structure crumbles, there is still going to be like a phoenix rising from the ashes.
Yes. No, yes, totally. And that's why it's so cool to talk to independent, like that. I'm so happy that your shop where you work exists. There's so many great independent stores and where I live here in North America that exist that sell and support smaller brands, artisanal brands, people doing interesting things. And there's still, like, for example, I love Chanel. Chanel is like, the image of old school classic, but I feel like they really still are striving for quality and integrity in their fragrances. I've heard some terrible things about some other aspects, maybe their bags and clothes, some other things. I mean, I don't want to comment too much on that, but for now, their fragrances are still really great. And so, so there's like on all levels, you can still choose as a business, you can still choose quality. You can choose to not release 1,000 flankers in a year. You can choose to wait and give your creatives time and give them, to invest in it. Every choice is an investment in a business, and you can choose what you invest in, right? So these are all choices that companies can make. And of course there are pressures, but there's still choices.
Yeah, I mean, in the case for Chanel, I remember reading about Jacques Polge, and it seemed like he did have his like corporate side of his job, where like Buddha, Chanel, and the main lines, you know, there was like a pressure that we need a best-selling men's fragrance. This, and to be fair, it was kind of the first of its kind to do what it did. So he was kind of creative, but the whole idea of the less exclusive line was there was none of that. He puts out one of those when they want. Like he speaks in glowing terms about number 18 and how much he loved creating that fragrance and how much he loves it. You know, and to be honest with you, it's kind of sad that not all perfumers are in a position to do that.
Yes.
Because there's like thousands of perfumers, and most of them have to, you know, we need a cheaper Tom Ford flanker, you know, and they have to do that, and they have to work within the budget. For me, it's kind of I'd find it a little bit soul destroying. You know, you'd have a bit of soul searching to do. Like, I didn't really come into it for this, you know.
Yes.
I really respect a lot of perfumers, even going through that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I have nothing but compassion. But the more I learn about it, as a consumer, as an outsider to the industry, the more I learn about it, the more just huge compassion I have for people who, you know, the industry is what it is, and the people who take that risk to join the industry and just hope for the best and hope that they could make it to a place where they have a bit of space, a bit of freedom, a bit of like personal integrity, or to feel that they have integrity in their work. And it's hard. It's really hard. So
there's a little heartbreaking side to this that I find that even perfumers who are making like you have to work with this budget, they do try. A lot of them try their best to try and put something interesting in there.
Yeah.
You know, they try their best to do something interesting. And I sometimes smell a perfume that might be cheap. I can smell it. They've tried there. You know, they have so many restraints, but they're really trying to push through and give you something interesting. But no one will notice and probably just trash it as like a cheap clone. But that's not their fault, you know.
Yes.
That's another thing. I think most people overestimate the input of the actual perfumer into a lot of these fragrances.
100%.
A lot of them are told what to do, and their fragrance, like literally, like Dominic Roupion won't be just smelling things and we think that's good. He makes something, he changes the form, it goes down to an evaluation team who smell it before him, before he gets it back. That's how it works in IFF, big companies.
Which is nuts, right? And people don't know that. They don't know about that corporate aspect where there's all those layers of evaluation, of budget office, there's so many layers. You're right. It's not just an artist in a studio that releases whatever he wants or she wants.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the dream, but not really.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, but it's cool that we get to talk about, you know, because, you know, people like us who are maybe more, well, people like you who really have true knowledge and experience in the industry, and the people like me who are kind of consumers but are trying to learn and trying to make their way and find things that we love, right? Who get together and talk about these things so that people can find interesting perfumes that they love and hopefully support the dream, support more creativity, more independence, more art, more creativity in the world of fragrance. And you mentioned something earlier. You said, I wanted to ask if that's okay. You mentioned that you love Moussinone. Is that the right musk?
Yeah.
Yeah, Moussinone. Do you know, and you might not, because I know it's, you know, it's impossible to tell just by smelling, or for me it is, but can you think of a, oops. Sorry, there you are. Pardon.
Go ahead.
Sorry, my internet is glitchy. I apologize. But for the musk Moussinone, and then we were also talking about iris fragrances, Orris butter iris fragrances. Do you have any recommendations for people? Like, say, if someone wants to smell Moussinone or Muscadone in a fragrance, like, are there any fragrances that you can think of that are pretty easily available? So for someone to get that, like you said, that skin scent, that warm skin scent, if they don't want to go and try to find the material, or maybe like you were saying, if you can find a clever iris fragrance that you love, treasure it. Are there any iris fragrances that you really treasure, that you really love, that you might recommend to people?
Yeah. So the Muscadone, well, I'm going to scare everyone. I know one fragrance that has an overdose of Muscadone, and I think it's one of the Dior Sauvage perfumes. Okay. Sorry, I'm just ruining everyone's dreams. it might be the Eau de Parfum or the Parfum, but it's something. It's like outrageously like 10, like.
Oh wow.
10%. Must be 5%. I've got my numbers wrong, but it's an overdose, and it's not expensive. It's quite expensive. but it's not the best fragrance to actually smell it. Like you won't go on, oh, I can smell it. I'd say something like Musk Tonkin by Parfum de Empire.
Oh, I
I
love
think,
that fragrance.
yeah,
Yeah,
it uses some of it, but that warm,
yeah, I
it's
know.
adding to the beer musk aspect. It really
Yeah.
is. That'll be one to try. I mean, there's a lot of other things going on in there, but it definitely has that.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool because I know exactly what when you say Musk Tonkin by Parfum d'Empire, I know exactly what you mean by that actual real human skin, like that almost fuzzy skin feel. Because I remember when I first tried Musk Tonkin, I fell in love with. I immediately bought 3 bottles. I was like, "This is it. This is amazing. I love it so much. This is like the musk that I've been wanting to find." And because I grew up, I'm kind of like Generation White Musk. Like
Okay.
when I was coming of age, I'm like I was born in 1979, so I'm kind of like a 90s mall kid. And like so when I was walking around the malls that we did in America back in the 90s, we would just walk around the mall and it was like Body Shop white musk was everywhere. And then like
Oh,
after that it was kind of like Armani for white for her was kind of like every which was I like that one a lot, but like just kind of white musk has been like the thing my whole life pretty much, especially in my teens and 20s. Um, and so and it was just fine. It's lovely. It's clean. It's nice, right?
yeah.
But then when I found Musk Tonkin, I was like, oh no, this is Musk. Like this is
Oh yeah.
it, right?
It's like Muscadine for me is almost a separate bracket of musk to like Kiehl's musk.
Mm,
Um, is heavy on galaxolide.
mm,
Jubilation Fan by Amouage is heavy on galaxolide. The Body Shop musk is a lot of galaxolide and it might be some ethylene brassylate. Those for me are very laundry clean musks. Muskellane for me doesn't have that. It's a warm skin smell. It's almost a true musk. It's going, because it comes from the musk deer. That's where we get the idea of musks.
mm,
Going for me more in the direction of what a musk should smell like
mm.
than what we've been conditioned to think it's this clean. I mean, they do have a place and they're lovely. They're great for florals. Even like for me, cashmeran, I always get confused, but for me, I don't think it is a musk, but for me, it acts like a musk. It's very
Totally.
close, very strong one. So them
Yeah.
types of things, them musks are good for florals and things like that.
Mm.
But for me, muscadone's in its own bracket, elevated. It's expensive, but I understand why it's good.
Oh yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's wonderful. And speaking of things that act like a musk, do you want to just real quick before we move on to Iris? Do you mind if I ask your opinion about salicylates? Like to me, they kind of act like musks in a way, and that they have that kind of filling, muting
Yeah.
fluffy thing sometimes. What do you think of salicylates? Do you like them, or because some people find them super annoying and some people really love them?
Well, I love one of my favorite materials, actually, even just to smell neat, is benzyl salicylate. I love it. Some people are nosmic to it and they can't smell it, but I really like it. It does behave like a musk. Doesn't for me, it doesn't have the soul or the texture of a musk.
Mm,
But in terms of how you can use it, like benzyl salicylate is seen as the molecule that even if a perfumer can't smell it, they can kind of detect it because what it's doing to everything else.
yeah,
And that's
totally.
what I think people associate with musks.
Yeah.
And you know, funny enough, patchouli works in that way as well.
Oh,
Patchouli
interesting.
is almost musk-like that it can sort of it works by shaping other things, but takes a background seat. And I've said this on Rich's channel before. Tom Ford's Black Orchid doesn't contain any musk at all. And
Really?
the reason is the perfumer realized because it was such an overdose of patchouli, is that the patchouli itself was behaving like a musk.
Hmm.
And the musks were redundant. Obviously, going through his trials, he thought, I just don't need these musks. I just put them in for no reason. Just keep it musk free. The patchouli can act in that way as well.
That's fascinating. Huh.
In a way, yeah, like a
Hmm.
salicylate would, and that sort of
Yeah.
musk, that as a
Yeah.
musk.
Definitely. Yeah.
But I
Definitely
love it.
affects others.
Yeah, I really love benzyl salicylate.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
I was smelling the salicylates a few weeks ago, and I was like, oh yeah, they're so interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
Cool. Cool.
The flavors and materials in musk tonkin for me it behaves like a musk is styrax.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
Um, and I mean, I have to sort of, what do I mean behaves like a musk? It just sort of has like a background fixative modifying effect. You know, it sort of shapes everything. It creates the premise for everything to work on. It's like the stage
Yes.
for the play. Styrax does that for me,
Hmm.
but in a weird, more sci-fi way. I find when I add Styrax, everything goes a bit sci-fi. It's got this
That's
weird
cool.
plasticky, floral space vibe to it. You know, if
Yeah,
aliens, if this whole alien thing is true and they come, they're going to stink of Styrax.
I can totally see that. Yeah, it does have this weird off-gassy thing. Yeah, totally. Huh, that's
Yeah.
so cool. All right, let me ask you, do you have any iris or orris recommendations for people?
You know what? The one I always say, I'm pretty sure it would contain, and I can't always say for certain, disclaimer. I'd say Iris Sandra by Naomi Goods is a nice one.
Mm,
Uh, it, it's that sort of carroty, warm, it's got a slight woodiness to it. I don't really get the ashiness as much as people say, personally, but it's all, when you smell things, everyone gets something different.
mm,
That's a really good one, and it's a very nicely done iris. Iris Silver Mist is lovely, but it can be quite hard to get for some people. Parfum d'Empire, because we was talking about Le Cri, I really love.
mm,
Bottle. That's really nice. Iris goes brilliantly with rose.
mm.
Usually you add a little bit of rose to an iris accord just to add that sort of richness and complexity and sparkle to it.
Yes.
Um, and my personal favorite, like irisy perfume, is 31 Rue Cambon.
Love it.
I can't say how much I love that fragrance. I don't
Yeah.
know why. Yeah. It's one of
It's
those I just go.
yes, it's so brilliant. It's prismatic. It's so perfect. Yeah.
And for
Yeah.
me, everything like the pepper, the benzoin overdose in there, the ambery accord, the jasmine, everything just adds to the iris. It's
Mm.
like the iris is just like they're like steroids just pumping into it, and it's just like we're gonna give you more of the iris. I
It's
really
such a
enjoy that.
stunning fragrance. Yes. And you mentioned that kind of rose and iris combination, which I agree. And it made me think of, I don't know if you have, I don't think there's distribution to the United States, but I'm sure there's a way to get you and Rich a sample. But there's a really cool artisanal independent perfumer here named Whitney Swales, who has her own little shop called Wit and West. And she does a lot of her own tinctures. And she does. So in the west of the United States, we actually have irises that they're not mute. They do produce a scent.
Okay.
It's not regular. And that's why they don't really that's why they don't crop it like industrially, because you can have like one clump of iris that's mute. And then right next to it is a clump of iris that has a smell. And the smells are not very uniform, although I don't think anyone's really tried to breed them to be uniform. But anyway, so she grew a bunch in her backyard, and she actually did an enfleurage of not the orris root, but the iris flowers, which is amazing. I've never smelled anything like it. And then she did that with a little bit of, and then she mixed that enfleurage with a bit of orris and a bit of rose. And the way that orris and the rose just cupped this iris flower enfleurage is just brilliant. um, and of course, this is like a small batch thing, right? Because when you do your own enfleurage, it's not like you have huge amounts of material, but it's definitely one that I would recommend. It's called Violeteer, named after the Violeteer hummingbird. But it's definitely like a cool thing to check out if you ever have a chance, if your store ever gets a sample, or if we can find a way to, I know shipping is difficult between
Yeah.
America and Europe, but it's definitely a really cool thing that I experienced that's new. It was new to me, at least.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, it's always exciting to smell something new. Like when I smell something new, I'm really like, wow.
Mm.
That sounds really interesting because you're right. Like even when like violet, people say, I mean, it kind of is a mute flower, but they used to actually make enfleurage from the violet flowers as
Oh,
well to
cool.
try and get the scent.
Yeah.
Like it's not completely mute. We do use the leaves, the violet leaf,
Yeah.
absolute, which comes from the violet flower. So it's
Yeah.
not completely mute, but yeah, I mean, enfleurage is one of those old techniques that actually could be useful for things like that. But it's
Totally.
just,
Yeah, it's not like industrial scale, like when something is an industrial scale useful, but it's still useful enough where people can make interesting things on a small scale, which
yeah.
is cool. Yeah.
And it kind of enfleurage almost actually behaves like a fixative.
Hmm.
because they're sort of, because it's very like the waxes and stuff, it will be like have a fixative property to them as well.
Oh, cool.
I mean, and I mean, a lot of these old perfume techniques, it's not like, we weren't as like the chemistry wasn't as advanced. I mean, we did have like, I always find it crazy that benzyl acetate was one of the first synthetics found in 1868. And when you smell it, it smells very modern. So I'm like, they smelled this back in 1868. So they did have some stuff, but like a lot of fragrances like bergamot and some citrus oils were used as solvents. That's why bergamot popped up a lot, because it would dissolve things. Ambergris was used because of its fixed properties, even the entourage. So they had like everything was kind of almost like practical as well as the scent. And the practicality sort of morphed its way into how we see fragrances.
Absolutely.
That was a weird sort of segue, but
no, you're right. And I think that's always something to remember, and that people don't understand is like sometimes the why of why a material becomes predominant in a certain era. A lot of it is functional, or a lot of it is structural, or a lot of it is because it makes sense industrially or for certain reasons that we don't always, because, unfortunately, it's so much is opaque with the industry. They don't really tell us why. A lot of it's just these like fantasy advertising campaigns as, oh, you're in a field, or you're in a lavender field and some mystical, magical place, and it's like, okay, but like I think it's actually more interesting what's really actually happening,
I agree, yeah. It's like, you made a good point there. It's actually more interesting what is actually happening. Just give us the information.
Yeah.
Get the PR.
Yes. Oh, yes, please. Because I think there's enough people that genuinely love the art form enough where we do just really want to know, like, just like music dorks will sit around and talk about key changes and stuff like that on albums or whatever. Like, there's enough fragrance dorks where I wish the industry or the brands would trust us with the real information, or at least enough of it where we could talk intelligently about it. Right. That would be really nice. Let's see. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I know like they're very secretive over formulas and stuff like that within the industry. Not really, because they have GCMSs passing around everywhere of everything, and you know what I mean. In the industry, everything is like very open. It's like one big sort of swingers party. I know that sounds terrible, but and then the outside, all like the people actually can't do anything. We just don't know much,
Yes, and that's unfortunate. I think that's one way, like keeping us okay, this is me just being a conspiracy theorist, and so I apologize, but part of me thinks, well, if the public is ignorant, then we'll have lower standards and they can get away with more. So that's beneficial to the industry in a way. And then the more positive, like trustworthy person thinks, well, actually, it is really difficult and complicated, and you do have to really learn a lot before you can understand. Because if you actually talk about like the fact that the perfume oil is only a tiny percentage of what's in the bottle, and when you tell that to someone, they might get offended, and then you have to explain about. I mean, it is get complicated, and nobody wants to sit around and talk about high school chemistry, and like it's I can see, the problems or the difficulties, but gosh, I wish they would trust us more.
But I think you both, I think, correct in a way. I think it's definitely easier to sell to more of an ignorant customer than it is a more clued in customer. Absolutely. And that goes for anything, I mean, to really like, it depends on how deep you want to get involved. I mean, I'm always learning. I mean, Jean-Claude Eleanor in his book, one of his books says he's self-taught. What he means is that he's still learning even to this day. Like you kind of never stop learning in fragrance. There's always something to learn.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether they just think, well, there's not really many. I mean, there are more people now with social media who are talking and, sharing knowledge, and there's more books coming out. Like I know Guy Robert was very supportive of Michael Edwards and early efforts by people to sort of write books and open up and talk about fragrances. Like the only reason why I know about Chanel No. 5 and Ernest Beau, which aldehydes are used in it and the whole story, is because Guy Robert told Michael Edwards, who wrote in the book, Perfume Legends.
Yeah.
There are perfumers out there who do want to share the knowledge, but sometimes they don't know where do they go to, who do they talk to? Like Julian Raskin is most likely not going to do an Instagram live tomorrow and tell everyone all the big secrets. Plus, they also have jobs. There's if they've got like NDAs, they can't talk about certain things because certain companies want to keep certain things secret. So I think it's a very it's like anything. It's kind of like like how some computer software it just keeps getting updated, but it's the same piece of software and it gets more glitches and they just build up and it gets more complex. I think it's just one of those things over time. There's many layers added to it and it's just become this weird thing.
Yes.
And it's closed off and some people are trying to open it. It's for me, it's the way I see it, it's all very complex and everything links.
Yes.
I do think you do have a point about like keeping the customers ignorant. And I think that's more from the business side people. Because they want to sell a product and if they say, oh, this is you see it all the time, this is Rose de Mai and all this, and they all claim, but it's only got a tiny amount. Obviously, if you're including perfume, crackhead, alarm bells are ring. They don't want to talk to you. They want to talk to the person who just believes it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's in the ecosystem of social media, it just becomes even more complicated there about, things that, a lot of influencer space, people who are very much just kind of like independent advertising almost. And it's like you said, there's so many layers and there's at least lucky for us, there's a richness of things to know, to talk about and to explore. And Jura, it's been an hour and I think it's time for me to on this end of the world, it's time for me to go and pick up my son from gym camp and get dinner started. But thank you so much. We didn't even talk about all the topics that we had on our list. So maybe if you don't mind coming back again, it would be so cool to have another conversation. And just thank you for all your amazing knowledge and analysis. And again, the time that you invested to learning it and that the fact you're willing to share with others, that's amazing. And I can't say thank you enough for your time and everything. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me on. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank anyone that listens and finds it interesting.
Yeah. And do you have an Instagram or YouTube or anything you want to advertise at all? Or
I haven't really got a YouTube. I mean, only come on this. I have got an Instagram if people want to follow me. I don't really talk about too much fragrance on it, but I might do in the future.
Okay.
I don't know how. I mean, you can drop it a link somewhere or something. I'll send it to you.
Yeah. Okay. I'll drop the link down below to find Jura Rose. And again, thank you so much. And we will, I'm sure chat very soon. And everybody out there, have a good day. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.